I'm Shannon Bream.
I'm Tom Shalhoub.
I'm Maria Bartiromo, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. I'm Dave Anthony. There's growing concern that disputes in Congress over spending and raising the debt limit could hurt an already fragile recovery.
It's sort of crazy to think that Congress would, for the first time, allow us to default on our debt, and I don't think we will. But if we did, it would tank the economy in a hurry.
I'm Lisa Brady. As thousands more migrants head toward the U.S., Mexico is now using a soccer stadium to process migrants at its southern border.
What the Mexican officials here are trying to figure out is, A, how to put a lid on it, and B, just how many are coming.
And I'm Guy Benson. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
There's a lot of uncertainty in Washington this week, including a possible government shutdown and disputes over raising the debt limit. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says if we don't increase it by October 18th, the U.S. could default.
It would be disastrous for the American economy, for global financial markets, and for millions of families and workers.
Putting at risk what she calls a fragile but rapid recovery. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell told the same Senate hearing,
as the economy continues to reopen, we are seeing upward pressure on prices, particularly due to supply bottlenecks in some sectors.
Added to all that, trillions of dollars in spending Democrats are proposing. But President Biden says,
we talk about price tags. It is zero price tag on the debt. We're going to pay for everything we spend.
With proposed tax hikes on corporations and wealthier Americans, which all Republicans oppose, and Congressman James Comer told Fox,
this is going to lead to higher inflation, and inflation is a tax on everyone. So this is the most expensive bill in the history of the American Congress.
And with so much at stake, we're doing a double take, giving you two different expert views.
We definitely have a lot of momentum, but we hit some speed bumps this year, the Delta variant being the number one speed bump.
Charles Payne is the host of Making Money on the Fox Business Network.
The supply chain issue, though, probably will last longer than even this latest round of COVID. And that's been a big, big problem. Consumer confidence came out. It was a major disaster. Number one issue was Delta. Number two was worrying that the economy is slowing down. And number three, ironically, was inflation, which I think might be the biggest issue because it hits people right in the face whenever they go out to the supermarket, to the grocery store, even a restaurant. And we're sort of disjointed as a nation right now. 11 million jobs open. The last jobs report, though, just 238,000, only 38,000 with women. Wages are starting to go up even for retail workers and restaurant workers. But there's just this weird kind of thing. And I got to be honest with you, as someone who's worked from home for almost 2 years, a large part of it is just people trying to get back into the rhythm of going out, going to work, going to the same job, leaving their homes. There's some things that we never dealt with ever before, and those have been wild cards as well.
Yeah, and you talked about the job market. There are a lot of openings, but there are also a lot of people who seem to need jobs but aren't taking them. I mean, how do we get service sector companies to be able to hire? There have been a lot of them that are struggling.
They are, and it's going to be real hard because you've seen a lot of these larger companies say, okay, we'll pay not just $15. I'm saying $16. Amazon advertised for 125,000 jobs. They got 1 million resumes because I guess the starting pay was $18 an hour with a $3,000 bonus. And so I think it's going to work itself out. People have cash. Our bank accounts are flush. We've got $2 trillion in excess savings. And I think that gives some people the luxury, even though the unemployment checks ran out for almost for everyone, the extra unemployment checks. I think people still have a little bit of time.
Congress dealing with all these economic issues, from the debt limit to the possible government shutdown and all of that. And then you, of course, have $3.5 trillion of spending on top of an infrastructure bill. How much does uncertainty in Washington affect the economy in general?
Right now, I think most people believe it's kabuki theater, or that the ghost in the machine will come down like the old Greek plays. and at the very last minute, rescue the damsel in distress. Someone will have a rope and a levee and lower the ghost down, and they'll pick her up and vanquish the demons, and we'll all live happily ever after. Because I think we've seen this so many times.
A lot of what you talked about might be related to the debt limit and the government shutdown, but $3.5 to $5 trillion in government spending in the infrastructure bill and what Democrats are hoping to do with the Build Back Better agenda for the president. How does that change the game? What does that do to the economy?
If we take it at face value, that it would be the $3.5 trillion wish list goes through, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure goes through, on top of the $1.9 trillion that already has gone through, and some of the programs in there. I think what it does is it moves us closer toward a European-style social welfare state that puts the onus on big government. So on one side of it, I think you've got this notion that maybe we've peaked as a nation. Maybe we should sort of divvy up the spoils and move sideways, not unlike Japan has done over the last 20 years, and some of these European nations even longer. And then the other part of the argument is that, no, we've got a long way to go. We're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. Now is the time to unleash entrepreneurship. Now is the time to lower taxes, get more people in the economy, get everyone ganged up on that ladder of success, and see where we can go next.
When you hear in the discussion about the $3.5 trillion bill that it's paid for, it's essentially funded by tax increases. You obviously focus a lot on the business sector. How does a corporate tax hike affect everything?
It slows investment. It slows hiring. It slows innovation. It slows the overall economy. That's not what we need right now. I just think these tax hikes would be really tough, but especially for small businesses.
You don't sound as chipper as you sometimes do when we talk to you. You sound a little more muted, like maybe you're a little concerned. Am I right or wrong?
I'm more frustrated, honestly. It's not, I'm still wearing the rose-colored glasses. And, honestly, I'm always excited. And I don't want to sound weird like this, but I feel good about me. I feel good about people who subscribe to my investment service. I feel good about people who watch my show. But I do worry, when I see the consumer confidence number plummeting. I do worry when I see individual investor confidence and bullishness plummeting. I don't want Americans to give up on this great thing we've got.
Well, we thank Charles, as always, and remind you can watch his show, Making Money with Charles Payne, weekdays at 2 p.m. Eastern on Fox Business. Time for a second opinion on the economy and the plans in Congress for infrastructure and $3.5 trillion in other spending. Alec Ross is a former senior advisor to President Obama, author of the book, The Raging 2020s.
The basis of the economy right now is actually pretty strong. Unemployment is down to 5.2%. We see wages going back up. And you know who can screw this up? Government can screw this up. If we have a government default, if we do not get a budget through, if we don't find some common ground between Democrats and Republicans and chart a road forward where we keep the government open, then we'll see that 5% unemployment rate tick back up to 7 and 8%. We will see wages stagnate. So the only entity that can screw this up for the American people right now is government.
The debt limit issue, provided, let's say, we can get past the shutdown issue. The debt limit, why is this so important?
Well, it's interesting because if we default, then what that means is people who hold U.S. bonds all across the country, all across the world. This is a lot of middle income families in the United States. This is every big corporation holds American bonds. Technically, we will be in default. It's sort of crazy to think that Congress would, for the first time, allow us to default on our debt. And I don't think we will. But if we did, it would tank the economy in a hurry.
$3.5 trillion. I mean, that is such a big number. And the president insists there is no cost to it, that it's paid for entirely, that it won't add to the debt. And then Republicans say, well, you paid for by people who have higher taxes. When you hear about zero cost, what's your reaction?
Well, look, there's no zero cost. You can't expand social welfare programs. You can't take Medicare and include dental, hearing, and vision. You can't include long-term care for the elderly and disabled, and you can't provide preschool and 2 years of community college for free with no cost. The question is just who pays and how it's paid for. And so what the Biden administration is really focused on here is increasing corporate taxes and increasing taxes on the wealthiest Americans. But you can't say no cost. You may be raising the revenues to pay for it, but it's got a cost.
What about that increase, though? Corporate tax rate, wealthier Americans paying more. You think that's a good, solid plan?
For companies with over $5 million in profits, it stings. For companies under $5 million, it doesn't really increase their taxes. Now, increasing the taxes on the wealthiest Americans, they're talking about that going from 37% to 39.6%, with a 3% surcharge for people making over $5 million a year. This is a case where I don't squeal as much, because if you're making over $5 million a year, I don't mind you're paying 3% more in taxes to help pay for things like dental, hearing, and vision and Medicare.
What about the claims that this kind of spending would lead to inflation, which is like a tax hike on everybody on all kinds of things we buy? We already are paying more for a lot of groceries and a lot of things.
So what's interesting about this is I think that this $3.5 trillion economic plan will actually have less of an impact on inflation than the infrastructure bill. Because if you think about the infrastructure bill, what are you doing with that? You're buying raw materials. You're buying steel. You're putting men with hard hats on the highway. So the $1 trillion infrastructure plan will actually have more to do with inflation than the $3.5 trillion economic plan.
It's been a tough 2 years, obviously, the pandemic and trying to recover, and we're still dealing with the coronavirus and on the inflation, all these things we just discussed. Your book, The Raging 2020s, what's so raging? What do you see that makes things so much better as we move into the future?
Well, look, I'll tell you what we're in danger of right now is having a decade where if we don't change things, the defining emotion will be rage. We see violent political movements rising across the political spectrum that would have been hard to think of 10, 15 years ago. And again, let's not make this about Democrats or about Republicans. Among Democrats, you saw violent protests among Black Lives Matter. Among people on the right, you saw what happened on January 6th. So what we see is rage is becoming increasingly common across the political spectrum in the United States. And I think, for example, going back to the beginning of our conversation, what I anticipate is that if Biden can't move through some of his economic plan, some of the political rage that we've seen sleeping a little bit since he's been president from the left is going to waken up, and they're going to say, you know what, Biden can't move our agenda, and you're going to see people back out on the streets. So
your use of the word rage is literal. Not it like is. The economy is raging. You mean people are angry.
Look, it has a purposeful dual connotation. So rage can be anger, but it also can be raging like how my 18-year-old son uses it, raging like a great party, raging like look at the value of my 401k going up. It could be either.
Alec Ross, former senior advisor to President Obama, now author of the book, The Raging 2020s, Companies, Countries, People, and the Fight for Our Future. Alec, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is Guy Benson with your Fox News commentary coming up.
President Biden has taken heat from both Republicans and Democrats lately on immigration, his former boss even chiming in.
What happens, at the Texas border is a painful reminder that we don't have this right yet.
Former President Barack Obama also telling ABC's Good Morning America on Tuesday the idea of having open borders is unsustainable. But like the Biden administration, he points to Congress for not passing reforms.
The president believes that our immigration system is incredibly broken.
White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki acknowledging a recent surge, but likening it to previous surges in 2019 and 2014. However, in July alone, there were some 200,000 encounters by Border Patrol, a 21% 21-year high and over 1 million people since January.
Don't get me wrong, I feel bad for these folks, but how do you handle a migration like that?
Doug Baxter has spent much of his life on the Rio Grande River and says he's never seen anything like it. But the surge doesn't start at the U.S. border. Migrants cross other borders to get there.
Every single one, essentially, of the 15,000 Haitians last week that ended up under that bridge in Del Rio first came through this point where we are.
Fox News correspondent Griff Jenkins is on Mexico's southern border with Guatemala in the border town of Tapachula, where thousands more have already arrived.
The Mexican officials here confirmed this week for us that there are currently some 10,000 Haitians alone, even more when you bring in the other migrants, stuck in Tapachula trying to apply for a refugee status that would give them the ability to move more freely north of this city into the interior of Mexico, as well as get a work permit while they bide their time, because as we know, for the majority of them, if not all of them, their ultimate final destination is the U.S. border.
Now, I know that some of the Haitians who had been under the bridge in Del Rio, Texas, had already been away from Haiti for, in some cases, multiple years, had been living in other countries. But whether we're talking about Haiti or you mentioned, some coming from Ghana and ending up crossing from Guatemala into Mexico, how are they getting to that point? I mean, it's a long journey to get to that point. And do the Mexican officials ask them that? Are they sort of challenged on those issues at that border?
Absolutely. So where we are in Tapachula, as I'm talking to you, it's this expanded refugee operations space because they're so overwhelmed with this unprecedented surge. It's a soccer stadium. They had to literally go from their operations center, which is a large building that's been there for many years, to the entire Olympic-sized soccer stadium because so many are coming, and they are coming largely, for those that are as far as Africa or Haiti, they come in from South America. And many of the migrants I've talked to talk about the treacherous journey between Colombia to Panama through what's known as the Darien Gap, a lawless, difficult, dangerous jungle terrain that takes 4, 5, 6 days to walk through. It is absolutely littered with criminals, with harsh conditions, and many of the migrants said that they witnessed a lot of people dying along that trip. And what no one really was paying attention to last week when the UN had their General Assembly was the president of Panama, Laurentino Cohen, stood up at the UN and said, this is something they've never seen before. He said in January in Panama, he had 800 migrants. Last month, he had 30,000. And so what the Mexican officials here are trying to figure out is, A, how to put a lid on it, and B, just how many are coming. Now, in the case of the Haitians, I like to always remind listeners that there are some significant things that the administration has done that have been interpreted as a green light that now is the time to come. And in the case of particularly the Haitians, at the end of May, the administration reinstated temporary protective status for migrants to the country of Haiti. That means that if they were to cross into the U.S. and claim asylum under protected status, they would have a better chance of being able to stay.
That temporary protected status Griff just mentioned has some important fine print that the Biden administration has been emphasizing.
Only Haitians living in the United States before July 29th are eligible for temporary protected status.
A message delivered by Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in Del Rio just before that encampment was rapidly cleared last week.
We are very concerned that Haitians who are taking this irregular migration path are receiving false information that the border is open or that temporary protected status is available.
But Haitians are only part of the surge. So what's driving it? Are the migrants saying they feel the administration is welcoming them, even while saying the border is closed?
The driving force is, of course, always the push factor from their home countries, as the Border Patrol says, a push factor of poverty, crime. But above all, you hear there just aren't jobs. There is no life for them in their home countries, so they want to come to the United States. However, because under this administration, they perceive that they will have a better chance of achieving that goal, what you have are an enormous number of people saying, now is my chance to roll the dice. And if you look at the recent situation in Del Rio last week, if you take the 15,000, and we know some 2,000 were deported back to Haiti, 12 to 13,000, according to Secretary Mayorkas, DHS Secretary, some 12,000, 13,000 were able to actually stay while they try and play out their claims, assuming they even go voluntarily to an immigration office to make that claim rather than hiding in the shadows. That's a success story. And those migrants send word back through text messages, emails, phone calls, on social media that they made it. And so in terms of what's pulling people up, the success stories to see that those that went before them were able to achieve the ultimate goal, that's only a motivation. And until what the Border Patrol officials tell me, until that motivation is taken away in a significant way, it's not going to slow anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Does Mexico, have grounds to tell people trying to cross into Mexico from Guatemala, you can't come in? Because if the numbers in Tapachula are already so overwhelming for that city, are they trying to tell more of them, no, you can't come in? Or is it really just based on whether they're planning to continue to go to the U.S.? If you're not staying in Mexico, okay, you can go on.
Mexico's generosity towards migrants is starting to slow because they see it as a numbers thing. They don't really consider if these migrants are going to the U.S., we're just going to facilitate them along. That's kind of already happening without them saying so, because for decades they've helped flow the migratory routes, which have ebbed and flowed for various reasons from various countries, and they know that almost all of them have the great dream of getting to the U.S. But while the U.S. has traditionally had some form of border enforcement, Mexico realizes that many of them might end up staying and trying to seek asylum in Mexico, and so they want to give them the opportunity to find some work, to contribute perhaps to where they're trying to settle. However, the backlog of processing those claims right now here in Tapachula is something they've never seen before. They've processed so far more than 77,000 claims this year, on pace to hit more than 90,000 by the end of September. And they said, compare that to last year, for the entire year, they had only some 41,000. And so it seems that the numbers game in their willingness to accept some of these migrants coming is growing thin by the sheer fact that they can't contain or handle this kind of volume.
Just one other question for you in terms of what they do there at the Mexican southern border. Do we know if any of these migrants are being COVID tested or background checked? Because that's something that's certainly a concern when they cross the U.S. border, at least to, some in Congress.
They are not COVID testing these migrants. They're coming in such massive numbers. They have had a government health area for these refugee operations that we've seen. We asked them, are you testing them? Are you giving them a vaccine? And they said, we are just here because if someone exhibits signs of COVID or they're feeling sick for any other reason, we're here to try and help them. And that is absolutely doing nothing to try and either find out how bad it is or to do anything in terms of mitigating the risk with respect to quarantine or anything of that matter. So it is a highly concerning and threatening COVID risk situation. We had one moment this week where a group of families from Ghana were very passionately upset because they said several members of their group needed to go to the hospital. They were so sick, but yet they weren't being admitted to the Mexican hospital for reasons that they don't have their registration papers, and another woman holding up her baby right in front of our cameras saying, my baby is sick, if he doesn't go to the hospital, he'll die. I mean, this is a humanitarian crisis as well as a COVID risk, which starts here and travels some 1,000, 1,500 miles to our border ultimately, and ends up being in the situation that we saw in Del Rio.
Well, Fox News correspondent Griff Jenkins from Mexico's southern border in Tapachula, thank you so much for your time and stay safe out there.
Lisa, thank you very much.
Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News. It's the latest when you need it, on demand, from Fox News and Amazon Alexa. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Guy Benson.
What's on your mind?
With a flurry of important votes coming up in Congress, President Biden and the White House have landed on an insulting, completely ludicrous new talking point. They claim that the president's agenda and a reconciliation bill that Democrats would like to pass in the ballpark of $3.5 trillion actually costs nothing. This is flat out nuts and wrong. The White House claims it's all going to be paid for with tax increases and other gimmicks, but nonpartisan analysts are highly dubious, as they should be. And the centrist Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that a $3.5 trillion bill would really look more like $5 to $5.5 trillion in real spending. Even if Democrats find enough tax increases to, quote, pay for the full freight, that doesn't mean that it's free. The money's going out the door. It is real spending to the tune of trillions. They brazenly call that price tag zero. It's a lie, and a multi-trillion-dollar one at that. This is Guy Benson, host of The Guy Benson Show.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Hey, it's Brett Larson, inviting you to download and listen to the new daily Fox on Tech podcast. There's part of a colorful late 90s iMac on Mars. It's an idea that seems a lot like Kickstarter, called Build It. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.